Today's video is about the incredibly brilliant things happening at the US Department of Transportation in the first month of the new administration. And it's exactly the kind of video I hoped I would never have to make when I started this channel in July of 2021. I'm gonna be honest, right now it's extremely hard to churn out the normal kinds of videos I've been doing since I started this channel 3+ years ago. And keep in mind, every video I've ever uploaded was made during a time when we had a normal president who did normal things every day, and not the chaos agent that we decided to elect this past November. I mean, I can't describe to you the vast difference between the things that are on my mind when the country is running somewhat normally, and the things that are on my mind when there's outrageous stuff in the news every day. Now, I'll just try to put you at ease for a second by confirming that this will not become a channel that just talks about politics every week, because number one, that would be exhausting, and I would just stop making videos. And number two, this administration is proving to be an absolute fire hose of terrible ideas and awful actions. Like, the bad things come in right on top of each other on the daily. Lucky for you, that doesn't work well in this format since I tend to work on my videos a couple weeks ahead. But on the other hand, it feels a bit tone deaf if I don't talk about things happening at the national level that are gonna have massive impacts on our cities. Keep in mind, when I say this administration is a fire hose, it's by design. They want to overwhelm us by doing so many objectionable things right out of the gate that it would be impossible to focus on any one thing. I did talk about this exact dynamic in my Project 2025 video back in July of last year, which feels like 3 or 4 lifetimes ago. And I don't say that as an I told you so, but just to be clear that I've been consistent on this, even if I don't talk about it every week. So today, I wanted to do us all a service by just focusing on one thing. And that is the first policy memos and administrative orders coming from our new Secretary of Transportation, which really set the stage for what we have to look forward to the next 4 years. First of all, understand that what we're seeing from the USDOT isn't happening in a vacuum. It's all connected to the new administration's broader agenda. So let's go to the first memo, implementation of executive orders addressing energy, climate change, diversity, and gender, which is addressed to heads of operating administrations, meaning bodies like the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Railroad Administration, the FAA, and several others. And I'm just going to read the headline. Identify and eliminate all orders, directives, rules, regulations, notices, guidance documents, funding agreements, programs, and policy statements, or portions thereof. Yeah, I think that covers just about everything, which were authorized, adopted, or approved between noon on January 20th, 2021 and noon on January 20th, 2025. So basically anything that was done during the Biden administration, and which reference or relate in any way to climate change, greenhouse gas, in scare quotes, emissions, racial equity, gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, environmental justice, or the Justice 40 initiative. Let's just pause for a moment on this DEI stuff, because the whole objection to it, as far as I can tell, is that white dudes are inherently more qualified than everyone else, and any effort to widen the search and look for capable candidates of any other persuasion is some sort of reverse discrimination. My take on this is that as recently as the 1970s, there were either 0 or 1 black starting quarterback in the National Football League, depending on the year, and the unspoken conventional wisdom, hideous as it is, was that black men didn't have the mental capacity or decision-making skills to do such a complicated job. Well, it's 2025, NFL offenses and defenses are orders of magnitude more complex than what they were in the 1970s, and now black quarterbacks account for roughly half the starting jobs, including both starting quarterbacks in this year's Super Bowl. This was all completely unimaginable just a few decades ago. So all I'm saying is developing black football players into quarterbacks and giving them job opportunities was the very definition of a DEI program, and you can't possibly argue that it hasn't made NFL football a better product. All I'm saying here is questioning racist assumptions has been an unmitigated good for this country, but you might not know it from the direction of the current administration. Okay, end rant. DEI is just one part of the quote-unquote woke agenda that this whole administration is going after, and it gets worse. For this next part, I'm relying on reporting from David Meyer at Streetsblog, who says that USDOT field offices have been directed to forward all statewide transportation improvement programs and metropolitan transportation improvement programs to the Secretary for review. STIPs and TIPs, as we call them in the biz, are generally four-year capital improvement programs consisting of transportation projects covering all modes that have committed funding. What it appears is happening here is that they're going to screen all the STIPs and TIPs for what they think are woke or green projects and either pull federal funding or possibly worse. It's really amazing stuff. These people are all about states' rights right up until the point where the state has the audacity to propose a project that, I don't know, reduces emissions and supports dense development, or say a project that addresses historic harms to disadvantaged communities. It's actually slightly comical if you really think about it. State DOTs have spent years trying to equity wash highway widening projects in an effort to manufacture community support, and now they probably have to go back and strip all the equity language from the project descriptions because, judging by the way everything else is going at the federal level right now, the USDOT is probably just going to run an Excel macro on all the STIPs and search for disfavored keywords. And just in case you're under the delusion that these aren't real things with real consequences, it was just announced that anticipated go-ahead for the West Seattle Link extension has been delayed, or possibly worse, to give the USDOT time to review and ensure consistency with the recent executive orders from the White House. I'm sure there's nothing to worry about. Let's go to the other document I want to share, the DOT order, ensuring reliance upon sound economic analysis in Department of Transportation policies, programs, and activities, which sounds reasonable and rational enough until you actually read it. You see, the USDOT is all about cost-benefit analysis, but they only want to account for costs and benefits that aren't woke. So, for example, the calculation of the social cost of carbon, scare quotes, is marked by logical deficiencies, not really, a poor basis in empirical science, I'm pretty sure the term empirical science is redundant, politicization, yeah, it's politicized all right, and the absence of a foundation in the legislation. There's laudable sounding stuff about reducing adverse impacts to families and communities, but here's the core thing I want to talk about. All USDOT supported investments that prioritize projects and goals that give preference to communities with marriage and birth rates higher than the national average, including in administering the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant Program. And I find it really interesting, and by that I mean very troubling, that they single out that FTA program. Now, in a minute, I'm going to dig into why, on the surface, this birth rate thing might seem arbitrary and a little stupid, but in actuality is extremely intentional and really very aggressively stupid. But first, periodic reminder to subscribe if you're appreciating the content. Connect on the apps, and this is another in the genre of video that seems to losing subscribers for some reason. I don't think I'm ever going to fully understand it. But as always, if I'm down subscribers but up patrons, then I'm going to feel like I'm at least on the right track. So if the spirit moves you, you know what to do. Okay, let's go back to the give preference to birth rates higher than the national average thing. If you don't read Streetsblog, they are doing some of the best work out there to cover what's going on at the federal level right now. And this piece, Why Trump's DOT is Promising More Money to States with Higher Birth Rates, by Kia Wilson, is worth a read. And it cites this Henry Graybar BlueSky post that points out that the states that have the highest fertility rates are red states, and vice versa, so it's really just kind of transparent pandering to Trump voters. Now, I could easily go into a whole bit about the politics of reality TV families that have like 20 kids, or tech billionaires who have 13 or 14, or secretaries of transportation who have however many kids this is. It's really not my intention to shame people for their life choices, but I do want to dig into this notion that the types of places where people settle down and have lots of kids are not creepy at all and inherently more worthy of investment than the cities where people move to in droves once they're old enough to make their own choices. And to do that, let's get slightly more granular and dig into some county level data from a state I'm pretty familiar with, Oregon. The numbers I'm sharing here come from the state's Population Research Center, housed at Portland State University. And honestly, I'm a little worried about the integrity of national data sets at this point, since everyone who does that kind of work seems to be getting fired. You might want to look to your state for leadership on this stuff for at least the next 4 years. First of all, my understanding is the US is currently seeing about 11 live births per 1,000 humans per year. There are other ways to measure birth rate, but they get kind of Handmaid's Tale-ish, and I just don't want to get into it. Oregon is sitting around 9 births a year, so as a bluish state, below the national average. And you might think, well, that's bad news for transportation funding. But dig a little deeper, and the state does have 4 counties that exceeded the national rate, and those are Malheur, Morrow, Sherman, and Umatilla. So I guess the good news for you viewers who live in Sherman County, population 1,917, or any of these other counties, is that the big urban rail transit grant you're waiting on is probably safe. The rest of us, though, probably on the chopping block. Before I leave Eastern Oregon, and yes, all of these counties voted heavily for Trump, just let me point out that Malheur, Morrow, and Umatilla are also the 3 counties that have the highest proportion of humans under 18 years old. In other words, people who aren't old enough to get the f out of those places yet. Quick digression. To me, at a deeper level, this is all about how society values women. There's all kinds of research on why there's an inverse correlation between, on the one hand, women's education levels and career paths, and on the other hand, how many children they end up having. It's mostly pretty intuitive stuff. Again, this isn't to shame anyone's life choices. For a certain type of person, just raising lots of kids is a virtue in itself, and it's their life's primary source of fulfillment and purpose. But for another certain type of person, perpetuating the species isn't that interesting of a goal in itself, and they just have other fish to fry. One of these types of people is, I think, a lot more likely to live in a city that has lots of educational and professional opportunities, and the other just doesn't find those aspects of cities valuable at all. Okay, end editorial. Anyway, let me present you with an alternative criterion for prioritizing federal transportation funding. Why not, instead of preferencing communities that have high birth rate but no one wants to live in once they turn 18, prioritize the places that people actually want to live in and that have low death rates, which makes at least as much logical sense. Because in Oregon, the list is much, much different. Your top 4 there are Benton, so Corvallis, College Town; Hood River, small but very spectacular if you can afford to live there; Washington, so suburban Portland West Side and a big tech hub; and Multnomah, so Portland itself, which I'm assured by conservative media is an extremely dangerous place to live. All I'm saying here is there's an argument to be made for investing in communities with higher education levels that spend proportionally less time killing themselves with alcoholism, obesity, firearms, and car crashes. Last thing on this, the other tidbit in this USDOT memo is that they want to prioritize projects that utilize user pay models, but they also want to kill New York City congestion pricing. It really just lays bare that there isn't really any principle to any of this, and they just want to stick it to places that didn't vote for their guy. Is it really that much to ask to have an administration that's motivated by something that's just slightly more noble than spite? It is almost impossible to keep up with the daily drama that's happening at the USDOT. It's just one thing after another, and some of the most painful stuff is all the efforts to rescind federal funding commitments for passenger rail, which the Biden administration put so much political capital into. But as tough as it is to watch, I have to stay informed, and today's sponsor, Ground News, gives me a great way to not only stay on top of what USDOT is up to, but really help me understand the ways it's being framed in different parts of the media ecosystem. Ground News is a website and app designed to make reading the news easier and more data-driven. Every day, they collect thousands of articles from all over the world and arrange them by story, complete with visual breakdowns of the reporting bias, reliability, and ownership, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. They even give you summaries to help you understand how those biases might influence framing. So the new U.S. Secretary of Transportation showed up at Los Angeles Union Station to announce a quote-unquote compliance review of California high-speed rail, as if it wasn't already the most scrutinized and slow-moving U.S. infrastructure project of all time. We can see over 60 different news sources reporting on it, with slightly more reporting coming from the right of center, so you do get a variety of framings. According to right-leaning bastion of journalism integrity, Louder with Crowder, Secretary Duffy gave a masterclass in shutting down protesters. But according to left-leaning Raw Story, the protesters drowned him in booze. I mean, I did watch the tape, and the secretary did seem a little taken aback that protesters even showed up. Anyway, what makes Ground News special is that you can easily browse through all these different perspectives, go to the source material, and draw your own conclusions. Now, it's no secret that our information environment is becoming ever more fractured, to the point where it seems like it's harder than ever to get at the objective truth of what's going on in our world. It is instructive to see how different parts of the political spectrum play choose your own reality, though. So a part of the app I really enjoy is the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. Like, here's one that apparently hasn't got picked up in left-leaning media at all, which is crazy to me because it's almost too funny. South Carolina Republican wants to put Trump on new $250 bill. Anyway, if you're looking for a way to get outside your own echo chamber and get a glimpse of the wild things going on in a completely different echo chamber, Ground News Blind Spot feature is for you. So Ground News is a great tool for sifting through the misinformation and bias that we're all confronted with daily, and I can't recommend it enough. In fact, they're currently offering 40% off their Vantage subscription, which is what I use for unlimited access to all their great features, including Blind Spot. You can only access this discount through my link, so go to ground.news/CityNerd, click the link in the description, or use the QR code here on screen and support an independent news platform that's working to make the media landscape more transparent. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for the direct support, which not only helps pay the bills, but helps me maintain some sort of belief in what I'm doing, even when times seem pretty dark. Pray for my subscriber count after this one. Anyway, keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode soon enough, and I'll see you then.